This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the September monthly partnership meeting of SCDRP, the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership. My name is Heather McCarthy, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of SCDRP. As you enter, for those of you just coming in, please type your name, affiliation, and location in the chat box. And we are such a multi-sectoral group, and every month it is an honor to share this hour with you. A warm welcome and hello. So here's our agenda for the SCDRP September monthly partnership meeting. First, an important announcement regarding the SCDRP Advisory Board election. Next, we have a multifaceted 45-minute webinar brought to you by 5 dynamite speakers from Jacobs entitled Climate Response and Resilience Funding and Financing. And if you're not familiar with Jacobs, Jacobs is a very large international firm with 400 offices located in over 40 countries working in the resilience space. After their presentation, we plan to have about 10-15 minutes Q&A, so please get your questions ready. So it is time for the annual SCDRP Advisory Board election. The nomination period has been open for almost 2 weeks, and it closes tomorrow, Friday, September 29th at midnight. We currently have 4 seats open, 2 seats representing the private sector, 1 seat representing North Carolina, and 1 seat representing the federal government. So as SCDRP grows, these seats have not been open before. So this is an exceptional time to step into a leadership role with SCDRP. And this opportunity will not come around for another 3 years. So please visit our website for details and access to the nominations forms. So today, this is a special webinar from Jacobs, includes 4 speakers and a moderator. And it is my absolute pleasure to first introduce to you our moderator, Holly Schmidt. Holly Jansen Schmidt is a principal and the Global Senior Director of Sustainability and Climate Response for the Americas at Jacobs. Holly, your job title is one of the best I have ever seen. So Holly provides consulting and advisory services to a wide range of public, private, and federal clientele. She manages the Resilience and Sustainability Business Advisory, which serves as a portal into Jacobs' vast technical services for logistical, defensible, and fundable solutions, as well as project definitions that help clients adapt to climate impacts, deliver resilience, and achieve sustainability. And Holly will introduce the rest of our esteemed speakers today. So it is my pleasure to present Holly Schmidt.
Thank you so much, Heather. We're really thrilled to be here today. And as we transition over to the slides, let me make sure I can get us sharing here. Just confirm, Heather, that you can see the slides.
Looks great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I had the pleasure of attending your annual meeting in January at the invite of Pamela Burkowski. So thank you very much, Pamela. She really saw a need for the types of work that Jacobs does to match up with your partnership and really bring that added perspective. And so as I sat on the panel during the annual meeting, there was a lot of conversation around what I call bridging the gap between ambition and action. And really, how do you fund these projects? So we do a lot of that at Jacobs, but really I wanted to give this audience the information and the knowledge of how you do these funding and financing strategies. So I've pulled together a great team for you today. Myself, thank you, Heather, for the wonderful introduction. I'll be facilitating the session. Then we'll go to Matt Schiller. He's going to talk about government relations and legislation, and he's going to touch on potentially the impacts of a government shutdown. Next is Russell Koff. He'll talk about grant opportunities. Built environment as a service and bringing private equity to the table will be covered by Jim Liu. Mike Matidich will cover funding strategies. And then Heather, as you mentioned, we're going to save about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So thank you again for the introduction. Matt, can I hand it over to you so that you can introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everybody. Matt Schiller with Jacobs, 14 years with the firm. Prior to that, spent about a decade in the House of Representatives. Pleased to say that a lot of that time was spent in the Florida delegation. Lots of experience with Miami-Dade County, FIU, a lot of the great schools down there, a number of different municipalities and counties. So it's a pleasure. Very familiar with the subject. Um, in the company, I do a lot of focus on federal appropriations, how it impacts resilience and infrastructure, water, transportation, energy. Pleasure to be here today. Thank you. And with that, I can hand it to Russell for his self-introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Good morning. Great to be with you this morning. My name is Russell Koff, and I lead Jacobs' infrastructure funding and grants practice. So we're a national group at Jacobs with staff across the country, and we work day in and day out with agencies large and small to strategize around federal funding, put together competitive projects, and then help agencies to develop grant applications, benefit cost analyses, all of these things that are really important to funding your projects, and work very, very often and collaboratively with Holly and Matt and everyone else on this team to get that work done. And we've also done a lot of great work around the Southeast in Florida, Puerto Rico. I'll touch on some of that later on this presentation. So thank you. I'll turn it to Jim.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Jim Liu here, Jacobs. I'm a business lead for advisory solutions, but in particular, I lead our built environment as a service offering, which you'll hear a little bit more today. My background is I've spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, from Bermuda all the way to Bahamas to Jamaica and Puerto Rico on infrastructure projects, and as well across the States. About 20 to 30 years of experience building alternative delivery. So happy to have this opportunity to meet you all, and delighted to be able to present one of the delivery vehicles that you might want to know about going forward. I'll pass it off to my colleague Mike next. Mike.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Matidich. I lead the economic and financial services consulting team at Jacobs, and we get involved our team is proactively involved in grantsmanship and securing outside funding, but also putting that outside funding in the context of a broader funding strategy that includes how that fits in with bonding and grants, loans, fees, and taxes. We work across the entire sort of spectrum of a range of infrastructure, water, wastewater, transportation, and increasingly, we've been helping clients with resilience-related projects. I was involved in a business case for Tyndall Air Force Base, looking at opportunities to secure funding for nature-based solutions for coastal resiliency is one example of some of the key projects that I and my team are involved with. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Holly, I guess.
Thank you, Mike. Again, we're really excited to be here today and share our knowledge with you. I just wanted to launch into the discussion around a program. Mike just mentioned the Tyndall Air Force Base Rebuild Program. I was fortunate enough to spend about 2 years on the Panhandle after Hurricane Michael hit the Panhandle, and really it was dead on to Tyndall Air Force Base, and it was 100% impacted in terms of their buildings and their infrastructure. So I led a lot of the teams looking at the entire rebuild program. And a key part of that was the funding and financing strategy. How do you build back more resiliently, more sustainably, and using smart technology that really exceeds code or exceeds what's called the UFC in the federal government, the Unified Facilities Criteria. And so in order to do that, we really needed to demonstrate that there was a strong business case for the added CapEx upfront that would then deliver the sustainable, resilient, and smart solutions and make sure that the installation was stronger, more efficient, and more intelligent. And so I wanted to share some of that information. And Mike just touched on the coastal resilience aspect of it. But when we did a program-wide analysis of the increased cost, what we found was it was around a 23% CapEx increase with an 11-year payback break-even period. It lowered the major replacement costs by $16 million over 30 years. It also lowered the annual O&M $3 million annually and $90 million over the 30 years. But all of the other non-financial aspects, such as health and wellness, environmental sensitivity, walkability, shade, and reduction of the heat islanding effect, using nature-based solutions really was doubling and tripling of those factors. And so it was very easy looking at it on a life cycle cost analysis basis to tell that compelling business investment justification. The key is to get off the CapEx only decision making wagon, which a lot of us have a different CapEx and OpEx management, and a lot of those decisions are made up front. But every time I've done a business case analysis on multi-billion-dollar programs and more modest programs, hundreds of millions of dollars and even less, it pays out, but you have to look at it on that life cycle analysis. Jim will talk a little bit about what we explored, bringing some potential private equity to the program if it didn't get congressional funding, which it did. It's a $5.3 billion rebuild program. And we've secured over $20 million to date based on a lot of the great work that Mike Matitich and his team did for coastal resilience, which wasn't part of that MILCON or military funding that came through. So we knew they needed coastal resilience. We knew it needed to be funded, but we had to find alternative means to fund that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, and he's going to talk to you about government relations and legislation. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Holly. So we'll run through some of the government relations angles as it relates to resilience. Next slide, please. There is a fair bit to get into. I don't want to go too deep through a rabbit hole, but I think you'll see there are a number of responsibilities that different parts of the federal government have. Now, you may have noticed that we're on the precipice of a shutdown here, which is certainly going to happen. As to how long it goes, that's a bit of an open question. It'll be more than a week in my estimation, and could easily go 2 or 3. We're not going to get too far into that right now, but there will be some impacts, certainly some impacts that we're already seeing to FEMA funding and disaster relief. So what we really wanted to look at were some of the responsibilities. Congress has a role, the administration has a role, and then folks on this call would certainly have a role as well. So starting with Congress, they're going to pass 2 types of resilience legislation that will make a difference on an annual basis. The first, of course, is spending, the annual appropriations process. The entire federal government is split up into 12 appropriations bills. And there's a House and a Senate Appropriations Committee, and they've each got 12 bills, and those have to pass for the government to be funded and run on the annual basis. That's what's causing the shutdown. Those 12 bills are not finished. We're having some issues there. And of course, one of those bills, Department of Homeland Security, is going to cover a lot of the disaster relief spending. Now, there are a number of other resilience programs that sit in different agencies that can touch on resilience, whether it's through Interior, EPA. Certainly, there's a program called PROTECT, which is brand new in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And Russell can get into some of these more specific grants down the road, but the point is you will get resilience pots all across the government. But all of those bills need to pass, and if not, then that's really where the problem lies. So in addition to appropriations, you also have what's called authorizing bills. These are bills that set the law, the rules of the road for what can the federal government spend money on. What are they allowed to spend money on, and up to what ceiling, and what are the rules around that? So we get, for example, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is called the NDAA, that's passed annually. It's one of the few things that Congress always does, no matter what, every year to set the rules of the road for the Pentagon. I think they're at 60 some odd years in a row without missing one, regardless of how many other things go into the dumpster fire that we are seeing. So we feel good about that. Every 2 years, they pass what's called a WRDA bill, Water Resources Development Act. That's the policy and project bill for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works program. Very important to not just advise, or not even advise, but to set the rules and to push core policy for resilience, natural solutions, all kinds of different things, but also to specifically authorize and allow both the investigation and the construction of resilience projects that are correlated to go forward. So there are all kinds of things there that matter. And then you also get occasional large outside bills that set policy and move the ball forward. We've had some very, very large spending bills in the last couple of years. You probably heard of the CHIPS Act on semiconductors, and the two others are listed here, the IIJA, which is also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the IRA, which is this enormous climate law for inflation reduction. Those are two very different bills. I'll just say very generally, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, $550 billion in spending for grants and formula money over 5 years. It's separate from appropriations. It's just sitting there in the Treasury, which is great. It's not going to be impacted by the shutdown. And that money is being put to work all over the country. So we've got 3 more years of that, which is guaranteed. It's fantastic. And then separate is this climate law, the Inflation Reduction Act. Only 13-14% of that is direct spending. The rest of it is related to, is really done through tax benefits. So, not something we're going to go too far down the road on today, but there are a million different types of energy benefits and renewable energy pieces to that bill. So really, that's Congress. We'll put that aside for a second and look at the administration. What do they have the ability to do once they have money to work with? They're going to be putting out regulations. They have an enormous regulatory responsibility that they're always working towards, that runs through departments and then up to the White House through what's called the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, that touch all kinds of federal spending. If you take federal spending, there are certainly regulations that go as attached to that. Obviously, there are permitting restrictions through NEPA, and then you can see Build America, Buy America, which is also something that this administration has essentially stapled to projects for what are the products and the steel and a variety of other things that need to be attached to these projects. We also may note, the White House is putting out guidebooks and calendars. You can track the money. I think this administration's actually done a pretty good job of making sure that folks understand what's the timing, what are the programs. There's so many programs in these large bills. They really want universities, municipalities, nonprofits to have a better sense of what is the money, when can I expect it, how do I plan my year? And Russell does a lot of this to help folks figure out how many things can I apply for and how do I get ready. If you wait until the opportunity pops out, you're probably not going to have enough time to be ready and competitive. And then lastly, again, everybody has a role to play here. There are stakeholder coalitions and folks like myself and others in DC, and then of course throughout the country that are talking to their representatives, taking very active roles in advocacy and pushing for more resilience funding in very specific ways. In the appropriations process, a lot of that happens early spring, March, April, and maybe a little earlier. That's when we're having conversations with the Appropriations Committee to talk about, okay, we need resilience funding. We really want to beef up some of these programs. Don't forget about it. If they don't hear from you, and there are spreadsheets, if they don't hear from stakeholders and then they don't think anyone cares, and cuts have to come from somewhere. If they're going to boost up another program, that money has to come from elsewhere. So, it's important that you're reaching out to your delegations and talking about what's important to you. The next one, please.
And Matt, you have about 2 minutes on this one, please.
I can be quick. Thank you. So this is just to touch on the shutdown. The federal funding is going to end midnight going into Sunday. That is going to happen. The way that you could continue to fund the government if they wanted to is through a continuing resolution that would keep us at level funding. They've chosen not to do so at this time. They just haven't gotten to that agreement. So yes, we're going to shut down. I looked at FEMA's plan yesterday. About 85% of their folks are going to be protected and not furloughed, because every federal agency has some leeway. If you protect people and property, you're allowed to go to work, and you're the military, you're going to work. Everybody else gets furloughed. So you've got a little bit of leeway there. So about 19,000 of their 22,000 folks are going to be okay. Now, that's not to say it's business as usual. There's a lot they cannot do. They can't enter into new grants. They can't enter into new funding negotiations. A lot of stuff is going to get pushed to the right on the calendar for money and decisions and notices of funding. So that's going to get held up. Safety inspections, things of that nature. The other issue, FEMA announced they're going to transition about $3 billion to the disaster relief fund away from long-term resilience projects that they were going to fund. This will impact a variety of southeastern states. Over 550 million, and it was supposed to go to Florida. Over 200 million that was supposed to go to Puerto Rico. Almost 30 million for North Carolina. A couple million for Georgia. It's a problem. They were running out of cash and basically had to do some accounting to take care of what they were concerned about with the hurricane season instead of these long-term resilience projects. It will probably all get worked out once we finish annual appropriations in the next couple months, but in the near term, there is an immediate issue there. The Biden administration is looking for enough money to carry themselves through. I'm not going to get too specific other than to say the House and Senate administration are fighting this out. This is one of these top line issues that's a huge concern to a lot of folks up there with Ukraine and several others. So I'm not going to make a guess other than to say folks are paying attention to this and realize that it's critical. And then you can see here the three main resilience agencies for how much they've gotten currently this fiscal year: NOAA, EPA, Corps Civil Works, and there are some others, but these are putting their money to work through projects, and hopefully they will see level or approximately level funding rolling into next year as well. So a lot of that money comes through competitive grants. Someone who can talk about that with great expertise, how to be successful, and really how to be competitive, because these programs are oversubscribed, is my colleague Russell Koff. I'm going to hand it to him now.
Okay, thanks very much, Matt. Yeah, and again, my name is Russell Koff, and I lead the infrastructure funding and grants team at Jacobs, and great to be with you all this morning. I'll be talking about a few grant programs that are on our radar and we think should be on your radar for the next 6 to 12 months. And I think, in talking to communities across the country, there's a lot of excitement about federal infrastructure funding and state infrastructure funding, but certainly a lot of grant fatigue, you might say, and too many forms and too many programs and hard to keep up with everything. So we hear that all the time. But there are some brand new opportunities that we'll talk about today that I think offer some really exciting potential to fund kind of out of the box ideas, collaborative resilience projects. So on the next slide here, these are some of the programs I wanted to spotlight. Certainly this is not comprehensive, but as I said a second ago, these are the programs that are really that we're tracking that are either out right now or will be out very soon, and are really targeted towards resilience and being prepared for disasters, sustainability, things like that. And I think one of the exciting things about the funding landscape now is that a lot of these silos that we used to see in federal grant programs, where it was Department of Transportation only funds transportation and NOAA only funds, restoration projects, things like that, they're kind of being broken down, and there's a recognition by a lot of funding agencies that a lot of these issues cross-pollinate, and so they're really opening up a lot of these funding programs to fund cross-section of issues that might be affecting your community, whether that's a stormwater project or a transportation project or what have you. And again, we're seeing really exciting opportunities from Department of Energy. There's many programs from EPA on things like solid waste recycling programs of all types that we just don't have time to cover today. But just to go top to bottom, and I'll dive into many of these programs in a little more detail on the following slides, but two programs really targeted towards coastal communities from NOAA: the Transformational Habitat Restoration and Coastal Resilience Program that was recently announced. Deadlines coming up. The Coastal Zone Management Program for coastal zone management programs. It's a smaller program, but the letter of interest period passed already, and they're accepting full applications in January. And then there's two programs from EPA that I'll touch on in more detail. Very large funding amounts. These are one time only, so will not be around again unless Congress passes another Inflation Reduction Act or something like that. We'll touch on FEMA BRIC, which I think many of you probably have experience with. And then I just wanted to flag a few US DOT transportation programs that although focused on transportation, are really looking for resilience projects. So can go to the next slide and spend a minute here on the NOAA Transformational Habitat Restoration and Coastal Resilience Program. And I'm a little intimidated because I know we have some colleagues from NOAA in the audience, which isn't customary for me when I'm presenting. So if I get anything wrong, you can please correct me. But this is the second year of this program, and $240 million available. Smaller grants between something like 3 and 6 million is what they're going to award. And really, the priorities here are, as it says in the middle of the slide there, sustaining productive fisheries, strengthening ecosystems, fostering regionally important habitat restoration, providing benefits to underserved communities, and enhancing community resilience. And so a lot of applications were put forward last year. Some of them, in urban areas, let's say, that had really strong resilience and underserved community benefits. And I think since then, NOAA has kind of clarified that this is really the program that they're looking to fund, sort of ecosystem habitat restoration. Of course, benefits to underserved communities are important as well. But a lot of the projects that we saw awarded here were really kind of NOAA's bread and butter projects of ecosystem restoration and things like that. So on the next slide, I think it can help to kind of illustrate a successful project, what was funded last year. This is one that we're very familiar with. Jacobs supported the Nature Conservancy and will be part of implementing this project as it moves forward, which is really exciting. So the project will implement sort of a host of living shoreline projects across underserved communities, across South Carolina, developing a plan to address statewide coastal risks, and then we'll also partner with the Marine Corps Air Station in Beaufort for a demonstration project. And so as we see with a lot of these programs, partnership is really, really key. That's going to be very important in these EPA programs I'll talk about now. So this project kind of exemplifies that with a host of partners on board to deliver this exciting project. And they were able to secure $6.2 million last year. The EPA program here, this is brand new climate pollution reduction grant program. The background here is that organizations across the country were awarded planning funds over the summer. It was not a competitive process. Metropolitan planning organizations and others received funding for planning. They need to accelerate that planning very quickly and develop a priority climate action plan by the spring. And then at the same time, EPA is going to be soliciting this applications. It's a massive program, 4.3 billion for grants anywhere from $2 to $500 million. So huge range there. And the catch is that the projects funded under this program need to be identified in one of these priority climate action plans. So this is a great time to talk to your partners that are developing these plans at this very moment and make sure that your project can be included in these plans. And we're still waiting for the notice of funding for this program to come out for the implementation dollars, so we don't know exactly what they're looking for, but they have made clear that eligible projects can be any type of project that addresses pollution reduction through transportation, buildings, industrial waste, water, sustainability, really anything. So that's kind of an exciting, cross-sector way to get a pollution reduction and to fund a lot of exciting projects. So I'm going to run out of time. I'll go to the next slide, and we'll go through the rest of these quickly and can follow up with any questions. Again, another EPA grant program, the Community Change Grant Program. We're still waiting for this notice of funding. And what's interesting here is that eligible applicants must be a community-based nonprofit, and it has to be a partnership between at least 2 CBOs or between a CBO and a local government. So again, a good opportunity to talk to your partners. in the nonprofit sector, and develop really community-led activities in any of the categories that you can see there on the slide. So really wide-ranging types of projects that they're interested in supporting. On the next slide, let's see, BRIC. BRIC is, this will be the third coming up or fourth cycle of BRIC. What's to note this year, this is a FEMA grant program for pre-disaster mitigation projects. Funding will be reduced significantly. We saw more than $2 billion available last year. We're expecting about 500 to 700 million this year. The NOFO is being delayed for some of the issues that Matt addressed. So this has been a tough program for a lot of agencies to get at, quite honestly, and to be successful at, but it's still a large pot of money, and FEMA is working every year to kind of improve the process. You know, on the next slide, got an example of a project that we worked on that was successful last year in securing BRIC funding in Jacksonville for upgrades to a wastewater treatment plant that was susceptible to flooding. So these are the types of projects, you know, public infrastructure assets that are vulnerable to disasters that that FEMA's really looking at. And finally, just want to mention one of the USDOT grant programs that's targeting resilience. This opportunity actually just passed for the Protect grant. This is the discretionary dollars of Protect. So we will see this program again, likely next summer. And you know, again, what they're looking for are upgrades to transportation assets that address resilience. So elevating a bridge that floods, let's say, things like that. We'll find out a lot more when the grant awards are made in a few months. But really, this is not the only grant program. I mentioned the RAISE grant program on the first slide from USDOT that's prioritizing resilience projects. So it's a good thing to keep your eye on. So with that, I'll turn it to Jim.
Great, thanks, Russell. Hey, everybody, I'm going to talk about built environment as a service, which is a Jacobs term, but it's actually about a delivery model. So this implies or assumes that you've been successfully awarded some funding. So the good news is you got some funding. The bad news is now you have to do the project. So what we've seen a lot of in the market is a lack of capacity and capability to effectively deliver. And what I'm going to talk about today is creating an integrated, cross-cutting, full life cycle delivery enterprise. So converting or packaging your project as a delivery enterprise and engaging the private sector and potentially some commercialization overlays to spread the benefits of recovery resiliency, and in doing so, it unlocks the capital projects. And really, it's been shown to optimize delivery. So what is it? It's essentially a design, build, finance, operate, and maintain full life cycle solution that's brought alongside the sponsor's enterprise. It doesn't run through it, or you don't need to run through this. This is a kind of companion that you would fund, but a delivery enterprise structure is set up to operate that infrastructure or solution as a 30-year business. And generally, they start at about $100 million. Could be a bundle of smaller projects, but generally that's the threshold. And really what it does is it untangles the sponsor's operations from the infrastructure. The infrastructure is getting very complicated. There's a lot of technology in it now, and very few have the capacity and capability to kind of see it through and to manage it properly for a state of good repair and efficiency through its life cycle. So this takes care of all of that. It also, on purpose, engages the economic ecosystem that surrounds it to maximize the benefits of resiliency, and also brings in private finance, which could be from pension funds, it could be from insurance companies, private equity funds, who are looking for highly predictive cash flows that would be associated with infrastructure. So let's look at a diagram at the right. And what we're looking to do is to create investable solutions. Holly, if we can hit the next one. So the first step is to understand the needs. What is the demand? What will be the predictive demand that this piece of infrastructure requires? And so the delivery enterprise starts as a pre-development agreement and starts to understand that. Once that's defined, then Holly, next one, please. It goes to the private sector market and engages the ecosystem that could deliver it as a total package. That's, the entities that are delisted there. And then it creates an enterprise solution, next one please, that would package the asset into potentially bundling offerings to the private sector. So let's talk about an example. Holly mentioned Tyndall, and actually Mike mentioned Tyndall as well. So we had a discussion with the Air Force when they're, can we just go back for 1 sec? Thanks. We had a discussion with the Air Force when we were helping them. And as they were looking to regenerate Tyndall, they realized there was a lot of social infrastructure that they really didn't want to get entangled in, and particularly, for example, the child development centers. So we showed them how this model could take carriage of the child development centers if they would offer some property on the base at the perimeter, but it could also support an overlay of a medical office building for the pediatricians and the dentists. And that would allow a pharmacy to be co-located. And in doing so, you probably would entice EV charging on the same property. So the need to create a resilience hub was stratified so that there was more business enterprise associated with it. And that brought along its financing and sharing of the infrastructure, the physical plant, the setup. So that was the means to make the operation more efficient and contribute and subsidize over a 30-year period the enterprise. Next slide, please. So how did this come to be? Well, it's been actually a progression or an evolution of how the market's responding. Originally, back in the day, sponsors would self-manage and self-execute and self-perform these projects by hiring individual staff. And then there was a resource transformation that they outsourced PMCM, and that was followed by a delivery transformation that introduced P3s. And I've spent a decade designing P3s. But P3s generally are kind of shrink wrapped around risk transfer and a performance payment mechanism. What built environment as a service does, or similar models, elevates it so there's infrastructure divergence. So it packages the infrastructure and the potential economic benefits as a standalone entity that's divergent from the sponsor's entity, but is still in their full control and delivers the value. So it's kind of an evolutionary step up the ladder. Next slide, please. And just to kind of underscore what it provides, in creating that delivery enterprise, it provides the liquidity, so that's private capital. It also provides the commercialization, like I've said in Tyndall example, and that's important because the revenue streams from the commercialization subsidizes the cost of money that on the private sector is higher than the public sector. So commercialization is a very important co-location item. It also, by starting off with this collective benefit, brings efficiency, affordability, and availability to the model. We've seen between 7 and 20% benefit from approaching it from the get-go in this way. Next slide. So we've going to illustrate it rather in a very detailed fashion, but basically the headline on this slide is on the left. You have the very traditional approach where a sponsor has their own stakeholders and users, and when they execute a project, they have to self-perform. They reach down into their infrastructure space and hire maybe a PMCM, design consultants, builders, facility managers. They might have to get additional funding sources, braiding in others. This is a lot of complexity that really doesn't have much to do with their core business. The alternative, next one please, is to recognize that the sponsor has the source of funds that they get from the appropriation, but then there's the next step where we start creating through a pre-development agreement. Next one, please. The special purpose vehicle, and generally starts with an advisor that helps do the framework. Next one. And that creates a special purpose vehicle that champions the enterprise that would fulfill the core requirements, but then wrap in the financing and any commercialization. And then, next one, that enterprise, the special purpose vehicle, would engage and keep going, two more, the required components themselves. So you see this kind of happens apart from the sponsor, but the sponsor still has full control. But it's a very efficient arrangement, and it does leverage private capital. Let's talk about the capital for a few secs. Keep going. Next slide. So if you look at the cash flow that you typically see in a traditional project, the blue line is what typically is the construction S curve. So you get the grant, you start the project, it's built over, this is life cycle, by the way. You build it over a number of years, and then there's some echoes further down the line for renewals and refreshes. That's very typical for a standard project. What we're trying to do here, and what's a factor of this model, is that it amortizes the cost. So you see that's the tan line. And in doing so, if you have braided funding or sequential funding, it allows you, like leasing an automobile, it allows you to pay over time to distribute your cash flow and to be able to respond to your normal business. Now, implicit in this is that the total cost of ownership has to be less. That's the diagram on the right, less than doing it yourself. If it's not less, then it's not worth the trouble. But that's the value for money. And actually what the delivery enterprise sees, next slide, is the delivery enterprise sees that green line. So because it's engaged early and integrated, it actually starts sooner, globally costs less, and performs earlier, as opposed to what a self-performing sponsor would achieve, because that's their core business. And on the right, when we run Monte Carlo assessments or analysis for these projects, you see that the red area is the alternative delivery is a lot more successful at delivering on time and on schedule, because the control it has over the full life cycle materializes, and you get a lot more predictability in the cost and the schedule. Next slide. And just on the last slide, I'll end here, is that
behind Jim.
Yeah.
So can you go through these really quickly? I want to make sure we give Mike enough time for his content too.
Yes, thanks, Holly. It's my
short period of time.
Okay, so just so you know, this isn't a random idea unique to Jacobs. We've been working with and have been watching the World Economic Forum, where there's this general interest in evolving the delivery of infrastructure to engage the private sector, to spread the benefits of resiliency, and this is very much a part of it. So I wanted to share with you that this delivery platform is active. It's based essentially on municipal airports that recognize that non-aeronautical revenue was a key part of their aviation world and has been very successfully adapted. Now we're looking to keep that kind of strategy or transfer that strategy to other asset classes. So that's a summary. I hope it was informative. I'm going to pass it now to my colleague, Mike. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm going to talk about overall funding strategy, a roadmap to phasing, sequencing, and funding. If we go to the next slide, Holly. So Matt and Russell have identified a lot of great opportunities for new grants and outside funding, but it's important to put that into the context of an overall financial plan and strategy, because there's additional funding. Typically the grants don't fully fund everything in a project, and some grants have matching share requirements and so forth. And so it's important to have a systematic process, and this four-step process of identifying and prioritizing goals, identifying candidate strategies and evaluating them, testing revenue generating capability and then developing a detailed implementation plan um, is really important in the current context to stay ahead of all of the opportunities that are out there. And I've got some slides that'll go through this process. And so if we could advance to the next slide. So the first part is when you're developing an overall funding strategy for your organization, to be deliberate about what are the priority goals for the funding program, and these are examples of some of the frequent goals for a funding program, like revenue generation, getting the money that you need, but also toward the right there's one, equity, in terms of repaying for anything that needs to be a loan or repaid, or taxes and fees. And so understanding what are the driving goals for the funding strategy will help figure out which outside funding programs are most compatible, but also which local sources you may need to tap to pay for the portions of projects that aren't covered by the outside grants. Um, and if we could advance to the next slide, and typically, developing financial policies and objectives requires engagement of a broad team that would include, municipal advisors, the governance organizations, if you're a municipal agency, it would be a city council, might be a board of directors or supervisors if you're another organization. But to have a deliberate strategy of what contingencies and reserves are needed to maintain an overall strong financial position as you're seeking grants, but also likely taking on some debt or having to have some local funding to help repay the portions of, again, the projects that aren't covered by free money from the outside grants. If we could advance to the next slide. And typically for large projects and programs, it's important, or one often ends up stacking multiple funding sources. And this shows, the columns here are the phases of a project, everything from developing a master plan, administration, design, construction, but then importantly being able to have a dedicated funding source for operating the facilities that are, once you implement the important new projects. And as shown in the construction column, given the significant cost of constructing projects, there might be a combination of funding sources where you might be combining a FEMA brick grant with a NOAA grant, but also having to do some local fees and charges to meet matching requirements or to fully fund the full implementation of the project. And that's why having a deliberate strategy and gaming through the combinations of sources is really critical to be able to make sure that you'll have enough money to really fully complete the project, which typically in the applications you have to be able to show where the full funding is coming from. If we could advance to the next slide. And fortunately, there is a growing array of options, to fully fund these programs. The growing grant programs, such as some of the continuing but new programs that Russell outlined, through toward the right here, private finance. Some of the options, like the example that that some of the examples that Jim Lou just identified of using sort of private finance, and then creating a stream of more annuity type payments rather than having to finance the construction directly. And if we could go to the next slide. And this slide just makes the point that once you've identified the funding options that you want to include in your strategy, it is important to do some modeling to game through to make sure that you are having sufficient funding to cover both the development costs, but then the ongoing operating and carrying costs for the new assets that are being developed. And if we could go to the next slide. And actually, why don't you skip pass this to the next slide, Holly. So the fourth step in the process is really and this is the final step, is just having a detailed game plan. And it's increasingly important with all of these sort of different deadlines that the grant programs have, or the other funding programs, to have a detailed game plan, somebody on point to track the notices of funding availability, plan for all of the steps that are needed, to get the grant submitted. And this is where being able to track the ability to get the governing bodies to adopt the resolutions that are needed is also critical. And what I would say is, once you're successful in getting the grants, there's also an administrative piece to it, that there are compliance requirements that it's important to take into consideration. And, Holly, if you could skip, actually, if you could advance 2 slides forward, just move forward to the next slide. And this is an example, if you secure a WIFIA loan, for example, through EPA, there's about a dozen federal flow-throughs that are critical to being able to compliance requirements and reporting requirements, and things that you need to be able to document that you're in compliance with. And so you're taking on those responsibilities with most federal grants and loans. And if you could advance to the next slide, Holly, there are a variety of ways that agencies that we've worked with, or others that we've observed, are used to be able to make sure that they're meeting all of those requirements. The graphic here is an example of San Mateo, which used a program portal where we are helping to support them in managing the delivery of their capital program. And as part of that, they built all of these compliance reporting deadlines into that portal. And that's one way of making sure that you're not missing any of the reporting or submittal requirements that are needed for the programs. And I think with that, I will wrap to allow some questions.
Thank you, Mike and team. We ran a little bit long, so we've got just a short period of time for some questions. So I'll open it up right now and see if we can answer anything for you, or if we need to do any follow-up.
And maybe if we could, Holly, if we could have our speakers provide their email addresses in the chat box for any follow-up questions, that would be fantastic.
Sure. I think we provided it at the beginning, but we can go ahead and put it at the end of the chat, so it's at the front of everyone's chat box or chat stream. I will say there's a lot to absorb in the presentation that we just gave you. Clearly, it's a complex project, but I think the overlying message is there's money out there. There's different colors of money out there. It's just a matter of understanding, how do you qualify? How do you access that money? How do you combine it and manage it? And that doesn't necessarily have to reside on your shoulders. There are entities out there, Jacobs is just one of them, that can help you understand how to qualify, access the money, manage the money, spend the money, and really manage the overall program. So with some engagement with consultants, financial consultants, you can really see a maximization of what you have in your capital spend and your OPEX to really, grow and encompass. A lot of these resilience projects are big, they're expensive, and they're complicated. And so hopefully this sheds some light on that. We are here to answer any questions that you might have following this. Feel free to contact me or the team directly, Russ, Matt, Mike, and Jim. And
we do have one from Dwayne, actually.
Oh, we do. Okay. And what was the question? I didn't grab it.
So many of us see these dollars being delivered at local levels, counties, cities, and I was just wondering how you overcome kind of the lack of knowledge and also the lack of a culture of looking at life cycle costs when you think about PPPs and financing. So it seems to be, even with simple metrics of long-term tax structure, it just seems like we've got a hurdle that these local, where we're doing the work, is where there's the least amount of sophistication about financing and CCPs or PPPs, I'm sorry.
Sure. And Jim, I'm going to toss that one over to you.
Sure, thanks, Holly. It's a great question, and I think you've hit on an excellent point. The the delivery vehicle that I mentioned, its purpose is so that you don't spend time inefficiently without the capacity or capability. Is the benefit would be to engage an advisor or to get some advice right up front, and the playbook is known. So don't forget, these folks like us, that's our core business. That's what we do on a daily basis. So while you might see this once a decade, we see it every day. So the idea would be to reach out and see if there's a match between kind of your trajectory and the capabilities and asset classes and delivery models, and certainly develop a playbook or a framework right up front so that you could see what you can do, what your local stakeholders can do, what the benefits that could be attributed to, who's around you, and more importantly, what has to be buttressed by an external provider. And that shapes the delivery enterprise. So it's custom tailored to your needs. That's the best time. Further downstream, it's very hard to get the benefit if you start too late at that because you've presupposed some stuff. So that's exactly the benefit of this model. It brings all those skills so that you don't have to hire them or stumble around, and makes you more efficient.
So quick follow-up, would you co-link that to like the feasibility or concept first phase of a project, or would you do it even before then?
Well, it's in parallel.
Well,
It's in parallel. As you define it, there's the pathway to delivery that's concurrent because one could shape the other, really. So the earlier you can gauge, and it's a light touch at the beginning, it's more of an option analysis, but think about the whole life cycle and how it would be delivered from the get-go and the benefits start accruing. I don't know
Great, thank you.
if you have any other thoughts to add on that.
Polly, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today. I'm sorry, we've run out of time, folks. This concludes our September monthly partnership meeting. Clearly, we need more time for more questions. And folks, if you do have more questions, I encourage you to reach out to the Jacobs team, and you can always email scdrp@socorro.org. Very special thank you to our super speakers from Jacobs. Thank you for taking time out. And a special thank you to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again on October 26th. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.